Well, since I had a significant part in writing the RFCs for both of these new rules initiatives, those definitely stick out. One reminder, don't forget, April 1st, 2025, they switched a date on us. So that might not be top of mind, so don't forget. You have to make sure that you respond to those notices of requests for return within 10 business days. But, those were the proposals that have passed already and that are, going to be happening in 2026 are significant. So, that's a big deal, and hopefully will have an impact on fraud through the network.
Welcome in, everybody. You're listening to Wrestling Payments, a podcast where we help payment professionals contend with the challenges of modernizing their payments operations and identifying ways to build for the future. If you're interested in payments innovation and modernization, you're in the right place. Now, let's get into it.
Hello and welcome to Wrestling Payments. I'm very excited. This is the last episode we're recording this year. And this year is 2024. I'm excited. Sometimes this time of year, you see a lot of articles, YouTubes on what's ahead. We're going to take a little bit of a different angle on that. We're going to say, how was the year? What stood out for my guests today and myself? And then we're going to look ahead. So then we'll do what everyone else does. But I'd like to introduce and Sean Carter, president of NEACH, and Mary Mumper, also of NEACH, Mary, education director. Could you guys just give a few words of who you are and who your favorite wrestler is?
Ooh, ouch. So I'm pretty old school, and my favorite wrestler was George the Animal Steel. So we're going way back with that one. I don't partake so much anymore, but back in the day, he was my fave. Maybe a little bit of Rowdy Roddy Piper as well. So the important part out of the way. My name is Mary. I'm director of education here at NEACH, and I have been in the financial industry for about 25 years now, mainly banking operations, but also a stint in internal audit.
And I don't want to interrupt, but how did you get into banking payments? Did you, as a child, say, I want to be in payments?
As a child, I wanted to go to law school and become a senator. I quickly learned that I didn't want to go to school for 8 years once I started college. So I worked retail for quite a while. And when I was working at the Gap, I had a coworker whose friend was a recruiter for Chicago NBD. And I was like, I'm done with retail. And she's like, hey, send me your resume. So I did, and I ended up in operations. And I have been there ever since.
Awesome. That's great. I love those stories. And I steal that question from Kevin Olson, but it's a great question. Sean, favorite wrestler? And how did you get here?
Yeah, so my favorite wrestler, I would have thought I would say The Rock or one of those people in that era. But my brother recently reminded me I used to cry when Coco Beware would lose a match. So I believe I was a Coco Beware fan.
Nice.
This is before I realized that it was scripted. I'm not going to say fake, but it was scripted, and I used to take those losses personally for Coco Beware. So I got here. I took a really weird route here. So I wanted to be in accounting and finance, but at the time I finished school, I was still a pizza maker in Boston. And so NEACH was a lot closer than where I was working doing accounting for my day job to get to my night job. So it just happened that once I got here to NEACH, working for you in accounting, Harry Carlson, our CEO, and Terry Good and Patty Prester, who's back, they all got me introduced to the rules, and I just fell in love with interpreting the rules and answering rule questions, and that was it. Once I read that rule book the first time, I was hooked on payments, and just to see, kind of the evolution is unbelievable, and getting to learn along the way a new payment system every once in a while, like FedNow RTP keeps you going, or when Check 21 came out. So there's always something, but it was a very exciting industry. So I don't think anybody starts out saying I want to be in payments, but once you're in, it's a great industry. It's always
You took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to say, once you're in payments, it's hard to get out because it's such a great industry. I know that may not sound, it may sound like, being a mortician, and some people want to be a mortician, but not me. But maybe if I was a mortician, I'd say, oh, once you get out, people are dying to get in. I don't know. Okay. So we want to talk about this year. I can't believe it's December. I was waiting for it to be summer, and then I realized summer was over. Lots have happened this year. We started out the year with some rule changes from NEACH, big series of rule changes. Took a little extra time to get those in. A couple of different requests for comments, requests for information, and some regulations that came out. Mary, let's start with you, So Mary has construction going on. So are you good?
I think so. If you didn't hear anything in my intro, okay, yeah. So right now there seems to be a bit of a lull.
Yep. So what stands out for you? Open floor.
Well, since I had a significant part in writing the RFCs for both of these new rules initiatives, those definitely stick out. One reminder, don't forget, April 1st, 2025, they switched a date on us. So that might not be top of mind, so don't forget. You have to make sure that you respond to those notices of requests for return within 10 business days. But, those were the proposals that have passed already and that are, going to be happening in 2026 are significant. So, that's a big deal, and hopefully will have an impact on fraud through the network. A couple of the other things that I thought of were the CFPB's passing of the personal financial data rights rule, which is going to have a massive impact on financial institutions. It's already been challenged in court by a couple of trade associations, and then we have the new administration coming in next year. So I have no idea what we're going to be looking at for that in the future, but it's significant at this point. And then there's just the continuing importance of things like AI and banking as a service and embedded finance and, those things that they've been around, but they continue to grow and grow and grow and continue to, I guess, kind of make their place in the financial industry. Looking at how some of those things have grown and the regulatory scrutiny, particularly in banking as a service with financial institutions and their partners, big regulatory scrutiny on KYC and the AML-CFT impacts within those partnerships. So those are the biggies that come to mind for me. And of course, as Sean also mentioned when we were talking before you hit record, the growth of fraud.
Just for
growth of fraud.
Just for the audience, if they're not familiar, if someone wasn't a payments person and they're listening because they're a wrestling fan, what is banking as a service?
So banking as a service is really, a FinTech company or something along those lines. Let's say they want to offer bank accounts to their customers, and they do not have a bank charter. So they can't do that without a partner. So they're going to partner with a financial institution in order to offer, products and services, and those, essentially using the license of their partner. So that's kind of the banking as a service kind of thing. So if the WWF, oh wait, it's not that anymore, right? But anyway, the WWE, is that what it is now? Whatever it is, if Jim McMahon decides that he wants to offer a, very special Glow account to some of, their fans, then they might partner with, a local financial institution out there in Stamford, Connecticut, and decide that they're gonna offer this. They're gonna partner with that financial institution, and you're gonna have these sweet debit cards with gorgeous ladies of wrestling on it, and offer all these. Maybe you get 10% off on tickets to live events if you bank with them. That type of deal. But the banking as service comes into that partnership. If I might put it in wrestling terms.
That was wonderful. Sean, you have a lot to keep up with. She has dropped more names in this episode than anyone has dropped in any other episode. So for you, Sean, do you agree with some of her observations? Do you have your own?
Yeah, no, I had a couple of the same things. Obviously, the not to rule ballots that were passed in an effort to influence or try to reduce credit push fraud in the network, NEACH as a new risk management framework, and these rules are a big part of that framework. And, to me, the biggest thing is, I'll try to do this in wrestling terms as well. So the ODFI has always been the heel, and we've relied on them to be everything, but now the RDFI is going to be put in a role where we're asking them to do more, right? And so I think from that standpoint, this is a pretty big change. And it's actually going to, going forward, one of the things that's going to have to happen is operations people are going to have a better understanding of what BSA people do, and BSA people are going to have a better understanding of what operations folks are doing. I agree with the 1033. We just had our member meeting the other day. We had Darren from Braid on, and there was a lot of pushback from the industry. They didn't get what they wanted as part of the easing of the proposed rule, which, as Mary mentioned, politically what happens next. But it's almost like 1033 in a way, though, is giving permission to every bank to do more with fintechs, right? It's not saying that explicitly, but what it does do is the intent is to foster innovation so that we get the underbanked and unbanked into the system. So I thought that was really interesting when you look at it like that. You step back from a new regulation, but there's an opportunity there as well. Fraud to me it's unbelievable. It's heartbreaking to be really honest. I'm a rules person at heart, and when NEACH did their strategy, I'm like, how do you measure this thing? So I started digging in to try to find stats on what the losses are, to see how do you say we're doing better 5 years from now. And you just read about the trafficking of kids and all this other stuff that is all tied to this fraud. It's really bad. And this year just seems like every third time you pick up the phone from a member, that's what this is about, is somebody had their account compromised, or what do we do? How can we help them? And in a tough economic environment, for people to be robbed of their last $1,500, it's got to be frightening. And then I would say one other big thing, Mary had mentioned RFCs that came out in the industry, but the expansion RFC on the expansion of the NSS settlement windows.
Can you again for the audience?
Yeah, so the National Settlement Service, which closes at a specific time every day and basically starts a new day, which is one of the reasons we don't have weekend, for most payment systems, we don't have weekend processing for wire or for ACH, and you have it for real time, but it's like pre-funded transactions. Everybody's accounts are funded in advance. The Federal Reserve has long, as part of the improving of the U.S. financial payment system, which part of that was creating faster payments in 2015, they wanted to look at opening that, and really creates the possibility of wires on weekends and holidays. And ultimately, if you can do that and NEACH can get a rule passed, you could actually have weekend and ACH. I mean, we're a long way off from that, but that, to me, them going out with that comment and having read some of the people's responses has really been interesting to that. So I think those are the biggest things for me. Obviously, AI, as Mary mentioned, is interesting. NEACH is using AI now. We have an AI product for rule books. I mean, it really is the speed of which that gets talked about and how banks are looking at it is something we'll have to keep, you look to the future, keep an eye on that. But I will say the change management piece of that's going to be important, right? So banks and anybody else that has employees, and you're having these backroom meetings about how you're going to use AI to be more efficient, you probably want to include the employees in those conversations, because employees are going to start getting really uncomfortable about what AI can do, because there may be a perceived thing going on that your job is going to be lost. I don't see that for us here, but I think in financial institutions, there's so much fraud that the tools will help, and then you can use the bodies to do everything else that you need to do. Right now, the bodies are doing too much of the busy work and not enough of the impactful work. So it's one of those things, can be a negative or a benefit, but this year it's been talked up. an awful lot.
I don't think I would disagree. I think you guys covered it all. I have just recently, like in the last 3 days, put myself on an accelerated course to learn everything I can about AI. And we've got 2 sessions this next year on AI. I think AI is one of those things that people, you mention and they go, oh yeah, I know what that is. It's Terminator, right? It's Terminator. Or HAL. It's HAL from Space Odyssey 2001. But that's not really what it is, right? So I think there's more to it and less to it. I think there's versions of it. You know, I've watched videos recently where they're basically cloning people. And you know, I want all the advice from Sean. Let's make a Sean AI. And we would do is we'd record Sean and we would take his transcripts and we'd feed it all into this machine. And this machine kind of evaluates the content in there. And, you know, what was that? There was a joke in there somewhere as far as the stylings of a comedian. But it would respond to a question based on everything Sean fed the machine. So there's lots of ways AI is used. There's lots of things AI can't do. There's additional issues that pop up, including ethics, right? So if we fed AI all the transcripts from a call from my brother, you would have a organized crime AI because, you know, he's from the other side of the tracks. So ethics, how do you make sure that the information these AIs are doing are right? How do you make sure they're staying correct? And it was really interesting. I listened last night to I think it was a podcast. It wasn't a book. I listened to a podcast and they described it as things AI can do and things AI can't do. And they described it as a circle. And if you had a point within the circle, that's something AI could get to. If you had a point outside of the circle, say point B, say it's something AI can't get to. But the truth of the matter is, the circle isn't a circle. The edge of AI is jagged. It is not a circle. There is not a known universe of things AI can do and things AI can't do. So it's really just a new thing that I think I'll start the next year predictions. I think AI will continue to evolve. I think financial institutions will continue to experiment with things AI can do. And I predict that some of the things will be wrong. Some of the investments would be bad investments. Do you remember when RTP came out? RTP came out in 2017. Half our members said, we're going to wait. Let's see what happens. FedNow came out just 2023. Now everyone's made the decision, let's move on. I think there's going to be a wait and see approach to AI for a lot of things. And the only other thing I would say is fraud. I think fraud is definitely going to continue at the rate it's at, which is a very bad rate, or maybe even accelerate. This thing, you know, the business of fraud has literally turned into a business. There are, you know, the post office is doing things to get rid of those keys that keep getting stolen and replace it with keypads or some other security measures. But there are vans that go around and steal the mail. They have people sorting through the mail and saying, what can we wash and what can't we wash? It's an organized crime. And AI, you know, the things on my accelerated course, AI is being used for fraud as well. So I think fraud may become one of the biggest issues next year for us to fight. Let's go back to Sean. Why don't you start out with anything you think for next year?
So I don't have predictions. I have hopes and wishes and dreams for next year. So one of them is I really do hope that as an industry, we around fraud, we reimagine what we're doing to educate people, what we're doing to try to prevent it, what we're doing to even define it the same way is just not working. So I give our members a ton of credit. I know locally, we have members in my town. They go to the community center. They send a branch person, and we got 20 people in a meeting, and they're trying to teach the people about scams. that's great for the 20 people, but it's a town of 30,000. And, even when NEACH does fraud sessions for a bank's customers, they're great events. It's awesome to get to meet the people. We're celebrating, hey, you got 50 people in the room. That's a great thing. But you ask them and they have 1,500 corporate cash management clients. So I just think we need to reimagine how we try to, whether it's public service campaigns, I'm on the Smokey the Bear kick on public campaigns, because when you research the Smokey the Bear campaign, it actually helped reduce forest fires. But if you go back and remember the first versions of it, it was pretty graphic what they showed you on those commercials to make you think, right? Like a burning squirrel or a deer that was burnt. It makes people think about their behavior. And the problem we're having with a lot of the fraud, because the weakness is the customer, banks, credit unions, they have to tippy-toe on how they can talk to people, right? Like they can't just say, hey, you're a disaster with your iPhone. I'm going to pull all your banking ability away from you. Or, you corporation, this is your fifth bad check. You can't write checks anymore. That just doesn't happen, right? And for a very good reason. But we need to, as an industry, support banks and credit unions better so that we don't have regulators pointing the blame at them, and we don't have the expectation of this getting fixed all on banks and credit unions. It's not fair. I think social media plays a role in this. The telecoms have a role to play in fighting fraud. I just had 3 this morning, scam likely. Well, then don't let the freaking call go through, right? If you know it's a scam, stop it, right? Because I might be gullible to fall for it. So I do think there's an opportunity for organizations like NEACH and some of our partners to do better and help. And I know that's going to be one of our corporate focuses. The other place I'd like to reimagine for our members is think about all these new things. Like Mary talked about the great impact of 1033. And let's say it remains as written, right? Let's get over that new regulation and start thinking about, okay, this is kind of a green light. What can we do with FinTechs? Is there products and services we can build around banking as a service or information sharing, right? That would help us, comply with this regulation, but maybe gain a competitive advantage. And I think the same is true with the NACHA changes as well, right? Like just being able to prevent fraud by catching transactions may require some products and services that can be developed for you to help your customers customers and members look at transactions in the warehouse maybe and say, oh my God, I shouldn't have did that, right? Because right now they see it the day of settlement and everything's already happened. And so I just want people to think about, these regulations. Nobody particularly likes regulations, right? But I mean, there's enough going on where regulations need to happen sometimes, but they don't always have to be a negative result to the institution. I think that wish is that people rethink it. And my last wish is everybody get on either the fraud classifier or the scam classifier from the Fed, because you're not going to have good public policy and rulemaking and anything else until we all define fraud the same way, because that's going to drive messaging, that's going to drive tools and products. And those 2 tools I mentioned, I mean, I'm sure there's others, but we got to find a consistent way to define, first-party fraud, third-party fraud, unauthorized versus unauthorized. We have to start talking about it the same way, because when you start attaching data to the losses and the types of scams, you could say, hey, 80% of it is romance scams. Great. Start working with the dating apps, right? Now you have a direction where you can go to have an outcome. But if we just say, $700 million has been lost in corporate fraud because of payments, yeah, but where is that? How do you start attacking that? That's too big of an apple without knowing where some of the weaknesses might be. So those are my wishes, not predictions for 2025.
Sean, I just want to follow up with a second. Let me follow up with a little bit of education. I think I found myself falling into the trap of scam fraud. They're the same thing. The other day during a conversation, which I immediately knew, no. That's wrong. So when you think of, and these are both available from the Federal Reserve, and they're just tools to really get us using the same words and understanding the same problems. When you think of a fraud, and this is a question, do you think this interpretation is wrong? When you think of a fraud, it's literally an armed robbery in my mind. Someone stole a check and changed it. Someone hacked into your account and stole your account information and is transferring money out of your account. Those are frauds. Those are hackers, if you will, going into the
interlopers. Yeah.
Right, interlopers. I always think of, so I don't use interlopers because I always think they have antlers, but going into the some sort of banking system and actually doing something that would be considered a crime immediately, it's a felony. The scams are softer. The scams are, I'm going to fool you into you doing an action. So look at it. I have these little kittens. They're so fluffy. Send me $50 and I'll reserve one for you. I'm in love with you, but I can't get out of this country because my visa, I need $600 for my visa. Could you send me $600 for my visa? So is that along the right track?
Yeah, so that's how I look at it. So, I mean, you may have others that comment on this podcast that look at it differently, but that's exactly how I did, in my own head, I distinguish it. And the reason I do it that way, because when you start talking about the solutions, right, you don't want to talk to a customer about raising the level of encryption and security on their iPhone. You're going to say, hey, you need to be a little more cautious when somebody's offering you a product that you can't see, feel, and touch, right? As opposed to if I get my account taken over, when the bank's trying to help me, that's a different conversation than, Sean, you tried to buy a cat. And to me, I think you have to separate those. I know others in presentations I've seen that are people I look up to and are great. They don't necessarily do it that way because ultimately the scam does result in a fraudulent payment. But I think when you are trying to solve the issue, you have to look at it in those two buckets, right? Like there is a difference between an account takeover, an interloper stealing my bank account, versus somebody deceiving me or making me do something. What's that new fancy term in the rules? Oh, that behavior word. And fraudulently induced behavior or something.
Yes. I just heard something on that. Yes.
Yeah. So I do think there's a difference there, and it is important, especially for banks and credit unions when dealing with how do you fix it going forward for the customer or member. It's important to know that there is a difference, and how you talk to them is going to be different. Handing me a NIST cybersecurity framework because I bought a kitten is not going to solve the kitten problem, right? And vice versa, right? If I had an account takeover and you tell me, give me a piece of paper about the Canadian lottery, like that's irrelevant, right? Mm-hmm. I need the NIST paperwork, and that person needs the tough love talk about be careful. So to me, that's, I would do it that way. Mary, I'd be interested to get your take as a former BSA dealing with this at an institution. How do you look at scam versus fraud? Do you put in the same subsect? How do you do it?
I being the love/hater of Reg E that I am, in my mind, I see authorized and unauthorized. And when the person actually physically makes the payment themselves and says, oh, I want that kitten, or, oh, I want to do this, or, oh, I love you, here's $8,000, that's an authorized transaction, and that's a scam. And when, another party actually performs the transaction, tricks somebody into giving up their user credentials, and then they go in and do the thing, that's unauthorized, and I bucket that in my head as fraud, and that's just how my brain works to think about that. And
I want to move on to Mary, but I have one more brilliant thing from Sean I want to hear, because I've heard it in our conversations, and you touched on it in your hopes and wishes. The idea of making people think about things different. Can you tell the full story about Smokey the?
Yeah. So if you look at the U.S. overall, we have a history of doing public service campaigns to try to solve problems, right? So The biggest failure, obviously, was the say no to drugs, right? That was a big push. This is your brain on drugs, and people still, they didn't respond to it, right? It actually, ultimately, to the point now where we legalize some of the stuff we were saying don't do back then, almost like a give up. And some of that ties to the individual's pleasure, right? People enjoy that feeling, or, they're out with their friends, whatever. No judging. When you look at the two other really successful ones, there's one on the drunk driving, right, which stats have shown that has had an impact, which used to be MAD. Mm-hmm. And I'll give two examples of why those are so effective. Number one, on prom night at most high schools, they come and do a demonstration and they blow up a car. And they say, this is what's going to happen if you drive drunk. Unless you're pretty foolish, you're going to go, okay, I'm not signing up to do that. I'll figure out another way. And then the other thing they do is the commercials were always heartbreaking, like a family was just taken away or somebody, right? And so for most people, there's still people that are going to go over the edge, and we're never going to get fraud to zero. But if you can tap into the good of the majority of people by saying, oh, my behavior here could lead to this, that's why they're effective. And the thing with the Smokey the Bear was interesting, because the people that are in the outdoors that go camping and stuff, if you ask them, their favorite thing about life is the outdoors. And so this was about saying, hey, we want you to enjoy the outdoors, but your behavior in some cases is killing the very thing that you love. And people start stepping back and going, oh, wow, yeah, maybe I'll be a little bit with my barbecue, or when I'm camping, I'm going to do a better job putting out the fire, whatever those things work. And so you can kind of see the areas that they did. They kind of made you feel guilty, right? Which was a need, right? Because in order for you to change behavior, you have to think something is wrong, right? Like, I mean, the biggest thing too, people always joke about when you go to the gym, when you go to the doctor, they kind of cushion and be like, well, you're a little overweight, you might want to go to the gym. How different would it be? Is you're going to die in 5 years unless you go to the gym?
Different.
Pretty more effective, right? And so the thing with the IT use cases and like be better with technology, I think part of the challenge is going to be there is a pleasure component to that. People are on their devices, they enjoy watching the videos. So I don't know if that necessarily brain on drugs type of thing is going to work. However, I don't think anybody that plays Roblox or watches videos on their lunch breaks wants kids to be sex trafficked. Mm-hmm. I'm going to throw that out there. I think 99.9% of those people would be heavily against the result of what happens from misuse of links and things like that. So I think there is an opportunity to do messaging where you are tying the end result to the behavior that would make people just stop. Because what we know from these scams is with a little bit of awareness, they're not overly complicated. Like, to me, I'm still impressed with things like account takeover and the business email compromise. There's a little bit of technology that you have to do, and you have to understand it a little bit to make it work. But these scams, like with the puppies, these scams, I'm a card collector, and I see a lot of these fake sales on Facebook about collections, or I have a Ken Griffey rookie card for $20. It's like, I try to get on there and tell people, don't buy this. This is obviously not a good card. But people do it. You'll say, oh, just DM'd you my payments. Like, so with a little bit of, hey, not everybody's a good person. You need to be careful with this technology, because here's the benefits of the technology. Here's the pleasure you derive. Here's the downside. And I just think that's hard for banks and credit unions to be the messenger alone on that, because when a bank hosts an event, I don't care who you are, people start thinking, what are they going to try to sell me, right? Even though the event's clearly welcome to everybody, you don't have to be a customer. We're just going to teach you about how to help your family members and your elderly relatives not fall for scams. It's just not working. And so I think you have to look at what has been successful before with the American public. You have to lean on what has worked in the past and try to avoid what some of the pitfalls may have been with the other things. And Joe, I've known you since I was 16. I don't think anybody I hung around with watched a commercial and was like, oh, my brain's an egg, I'm not going to do that. But if you had said the person's getting that money and then they're going to traffic people over borders, or it's going to lead to guns, or people building a nuclear bomb in another country, that might have swayed some folks early 90s from going down a different path. But, again, it's not a knock at what they tried to do. It's very noble to try to get people not to do drugs, because as fun as they might be for some people, they're probably not good for you in the long run. And I'll stand by that prediction. That's a prediction. But yeah, so to me, I think that's the thing I worry about, is that the regulators and everybody involved is just putting this on the FIs. And to me, it's wholly unfair. And the banks are in the middle of it. Banks and credit unions are in the middle of it, fighting it every day. They don't have the time to do what needs to be done. So I think that's where the industry has to help. And, we'll talk to our members about something that NEACH is looking at and, working with a company to do. We'll get, we'll see if there's an appetite, but I just think we have to look at it differently. And this is not something NEACH can fix with rule changes, or there's not a regulation that's going to come out that makes you not buy a puppy, Joe. It's just not going to happen.
Full up on animals.
Yeah, your wife loves animals. I love puppies too, So I just think that's something that we can do better. I think we can do it, honestly. Not to zero, but I think we can reduce a lot of the fraud.
Yeah, no, I think that's great insight. Hopefully, as people think about how to solve fraud, they keep that story in mind. How do we make it impactful? Mary. Yeah. So I didn't know this was the hopes and wishes episode, or do you want to go with a straight out prediction, or are you just curious about something next year?
Can I first just add a couple of tidbits onto what Sean was talking about?
100%.
Because I agree wholeheartedly. And one of the things that I realize when I talk to people who aren't in the payments industry, and even some folks who are bankers but aren't necessarily into like the payments piece of it, is a lot of folks just think that these scammers are, bad acting individuals, or they're like here in like the US. Like when I tell people, like, don't answer those stupid questions about what your first car was and what your first job was. Well, how will they use that? And there's no awareness that there are literally like factories of trafficked people that are actually doing these scams in different countries. And there are folks that I follow on LinkedIn where, they'll post. One woman recently visited near the Myanmar border and had like photos of these compounds where these calls are being made from and these posts are happening. And it is literally an industry, like you guys mentioned, but I don't think there's awareness of that at all, and the fact that they're actually using trafficked people to do this. And that's something that I feel like should be part of education to the general public. Like, here's what's happening here. And this is why they can actually take those answers to your silly, fun Facebook quizzes and tie them back to your email. And, if they've figured out, let's say, what your email address is, and they've found where your password elsewhere has been compromised, and you probably use the same password for everything like so many do, then, they have a way into your bank account. And now you've given them the security questions. You've given them the answers to those if those are still used, and you're unlocking this, not realizing how massive this industry is, and that it's not just a couple of people who are putting these things together. It's not just, some, smart people who are misusing their intelligence to get your money. It's so huge and frightening. So I think, that's part of the education that needs to happen, for the public generally to realize, like, this is actually what this looks like. Whatever's in your head, the Nigerian prince scam and all of that, that's gone. You see these emails now and they are well written. you can still find clues, but they're not going to be as easily spottable. And some of the scams, like the ones that actually come through, text, where it's actually in the text string of your financial institution and legit texts you've gotten before, like it's there's so much. And agreed, a lot of these, stem from, loneliness, especially when we're talking, I hate the term, but the pig butchering scams, where these scammers make you trust them and you actually think you know them because you've had all these conversations and yada, yada, yada. Banks are not, bank employees are not social workers, right? They can't deal with that underlying human condition of loneliness and need for connection that these scammers prey upon. Banks are not going to be able to resolve this just by saying, do you actually know the person you're sending this money to? I've seen tons of different posts on social media where people are just up in arms because their bank asked this and it's none of their business and they're just going to lie to them. And then you see a handful of, commentary underneath that says, well, they're asking that because of how many scams there are and to prevent people, hopefully, from losing, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They can only do so much. So just piggybacking on what Sean said, like it does, in order to tackle fraud in any, way, shape, or form, especially when it comes to these scams and people preying on individuals, is that it needs to be a wider net. It can't just be financial institutions trying to, stick their finger in a dike and stop the dam from bursting. It's impossible.
This could have been 2 episodes.
So those are my thoughts there. But I think it's brilliant that they understand that and then just the old adage, if it's too good to be true, it is. And to know that when you fall for something like this, when you're tricked into something like this, that here are the far-ranging consequences. You don't want people to feel bad because sometimes they are really good scams, and sometimes people are just really vulnerable to these things. But maybe those who should know better, will think twice. And that is hopefully enough. And I know the financial industry hates friction in payments and so forth and so on. But if that friction just, causes a minute or two or, to think twice, maybe it's not such a horrible thing. And hopefully the next time I go to, FPC, I won't get beaten for that. I'm kidding. But it's a thing. I worked for a FinTech for a decade, and friction was not something that we wanted to see in our product. You didn't want that lag. You wanted everything to run smoothly. You didn't want any hang-ups, but sometimes it might be helpful in that scenario.
No, it's great information.
So on to 2025. I honestly have no idea. Like who knows what's going to happen? It's a crapshoot to me of, with the incoming administration, what we're going to see. There's going to be a whole lot of change, and I think people are hoping for a rollback on some of the CFPB regulations and things like that. I have no idea. But I will say that I definitely expect to see more growth in, fintechs and banking as a service, and as particularly embedded finance, where you have, like I can buy something when I'm on Instagram. I can buy something when I'm on Facebook. That's, embedded finance, more places where you'll be able to have that kind of connection to do these things. I expect to see that grow. I expect to see AI continue growing. But, the regulatory wise, I think is anxious to see what happens as the next person.
Do you think that'll happen right away, or do you think we'll be watching it all year?
I think there's probably enough friction that it might take a minute, but I think movement towards will start happening, but I think there might be still enough friction in that process to slow things down, but we'll see.
Interesting. Super interesting. Yeah, I certainly don't have anything to add. Any parting words?
No, I'll just say that, as every year, last 10 years has been an indicator, there will be something next year that we didn't see coming, whether it's on RFC or product that terms or use case that takes everybody by surprise. I just think our financial institutions just have to be always on the lookout for those opportunities. And so there'll be something next year that we're all talking about on this one that said, oh, wow, we didn't see that coming. But it'd be nice if fraud went down, but I don't suspect we will see that next year.
Yeah. Mary?
No, I do. One thing I hear bubbling up is that we might see some ease of operation for crypto. So that could be interesting.
We need a crypto episode again. So much. There is a crypto czar. I don't ever remember there being a crypto czar. So there is now a U.S. crypto czar, or there will be.
Joe and Mary, what's interesting? What we didn't even get to, that's a huge change in 2025 is the wire system rolling over, the Fed rolling over in March.
Shoot, we didn't.
No, I mean, that's just, isn't that crazy how much stuff is actually going on, and you have this massive change that didn't even get to the conversation. So that just shows the industry that we're in, where you can have all this, and oh, by the way, we're dumping this massive change onto everybody for wire processing. So my prediction is that that's going to go as well as people think it's going to go. So if you think it's going to go good, it might go good. If you think it's going to go bad, there may be some hiccups, but you need to work with your cores, talk with the Fed, make sure you're ready for that. You have to be ready for that and all the downstream pieces. So yeah, that's one thing we didn't get to, Joe.
Long story short, Sean and our board were in communication with the Fed, and there's going to be a survey that goes out on how it's going. I try to be quiet. I'm like, at heart, I'm an ACH guy and a wrestling fan, but an ACH guy. So I try not to comment on, wire, but it could be a Y2K moment for wire transfers on that one day. Yeah. Where things just stop. So,
so luckily for us at NEACH, we have a Fed Reserve board rep who got our board members talking about this and just the uneasiness in the room and where they were at, not knowing necessarily where their vendors are at. There will be a survey that is going to go to all Fedline participants. So shout out to the NEACH board for driving that. But their honesty in that room is what made that happen. So it's a great thing when people can just say, I'm nervous, and that's okay, right? Because then you start asking the right questions, or you get to the people that can get the right questions. So if any of NEACH members have a question on the Fed changing over in March, please reach out to us. We'll get you to the right people if we can't help.
Just wrote down an episode, so we probably need an episode on that too. Yeah. All right.
That's like when they merged WCW and WWE. That's a bit like, if you were to consider what the moment size is, right? Would you call it that?
I don't know. That was. I have feelings. I have feelings.
Joe's still mad about the bash.
Still mad about Hulk Hogan, man. Still mad.
So we got to do a episode with you and a therapist when they ask you, what's the worst day in your life? And you say, oh yeah, it was when Hulk Hogan joined the NWO.
I can remember what he was wearing. It's bad. Sorry, Mary. Did Mary any other things?
I don't think so. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to everyone.
It may be right around New Year's this episode comes out, so happy New Year as well. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for joining me. Mary wins the prize as the best wrestling payment expert ever on the show. Thank you, Mary. Great job.
Tough to keep up with.
Yeah. And Sean, you get demerits for saying scripted.
Oh.
Just saying.
Okay.
All right.
On behalf of NEACH, your trusted resource in payments, and our guests, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning into the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to hear more about payments innovation and modernization, you can find the Wrestling Payments Podcast on the podcast page of NEACH.org or wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just search for Wrestling Payments in your podcast app. Thanks for listening.